I think you always learn something and you can always again build on that. You always have new knowledge. Even though it turns out you were wrong, it's still new knowledge.
Welcome to Called to Science, where we delve into the untold stories of the scientists pushing the boundaries of the life sciences. I'm your host, science journalist Brad Van Perdon, and today we talk about the drive of curiosity, the importance of risk-taking in science, and whether your high school grades really matter. Hello, Colinda Scheele.
Hello.
Not many people can say they've seen cancer cells dividing, let alone captured it on film, but you have. And your research career is marked with many other notable achievements and awards, including the distinction of earning a group leader position directly after finishing your PhD, which, just like catching cancer cells dividing on film, is not an everyday occurrence. Now, on the other side of this table, you lead your own group of graduate students and your research investigates tumor progression in healthy tissues. And somehow you still find time to disappear off the grid for multi-day hiking trips. Something I'm really curious to ask you about. Colinda, welcome to Call to Science.
Thank you.
I think maybe we should change the focus of the podcast to time management, and you could give us all tips on how to be more productive. You seem to have accomplished a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. I like my job, so then it doesn't take a lot of effort. And then it usually goes smoothly. Of course, there's also times where it's a lot, but in general, it goes well.
Great. I've got a lot of questions about your work and your career, but I'm curious about your upbringing. Let's start there. In the Zeeland, a region of the Netherlands, from my understanding, life in a village in the Zeeland is pretty far removed from laboratories and academia.
Yeah. So indeed, there's no academic hospitals in Zeeland. There is no university in Zeeland. It was really rural area, a small village, about 500 people. Very, very calm, very quiet, but I really enjoyed it. I'm not really a city person, I guess because of that, because I really grew up in a small village and I still enjoy living in a small village. So also right now, although I work in Leuven, I live in a small village on the countryside, let's say. Of course, close to Leuven, but still.
That was a conscious choice to not be in the city. Yeah,
because I lived during my studies. I lived in Utrecht in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and I enjoyed it a lot. But then when I moved to Belgium, I thought, let's go back, to the to the roots and just enjoy the countryside life again. Yeah.
So growing up in that environment in the countryside, I imagine nature, the outdoors is a part of your life. Yeah. How did you then get into science research? Was it from the outdoors, from nature, or?
No, not really. I always wanted to study medicine. So I tried it, but I didn't get into the studies because they have this, it's called numerus fixus. I don't know if that's an English term, but they have a cap. So you need to be lucky to get in. And actually my high school grades, they were not super good. So because of that, they thought I would not be good enough to study medicine. And then I studied biomedical sciences instead. And actually then I discovered that I really, really enjoyed the science part of that, and really, I was really interested in, studying new things, really discovering proteins, molecules, and during medicine, I think it's more about diseases and how to treat patients, but not so much about the details. And during the biomedical sciences study, I really noticed that this is what I love the most. So of course, understanding disease, but then really diving into the details of it. That's why in the end, I decided to choose for science. But of course, I had no examples. My parents didn't go to university. Also in the family, there were not many people that actually continued after high school to do and get a degree. So I was the first one, and so I didn't have any examples of how it would be a life in science. So it was just me discovering the world of science and enjoying it. Yeah.
Interesting. I picked up on something you said there about your grades in high school, maybe not being the best, and I had the same situation, and then found myself in doing a PhD, which is something that it's kind of a mixed message, because you want to say to young people, well, your grades in high school don't matter. But I think it shows that if you're determined, or if you have an opportunity, you can still achieve these things. So maybe don't stress so much in high school.
Yeah, I mean, I can probably also give a bit of detail why my grades were not so good. So I during the primary school years, I was always the best of the class, and because of that, they allowed me to skip one year. So I was always the youngest, but still, I mean, I always wanted to be the best, and I really enjoyed it. And then also to learn new things and to really improve, and the reading and the writing, and that was really, I loved it a lot. And then I went to high school, and somehow the challenges were not there any longer. I started to be bored. And because of that, I actually just quit. I was like, okay, I'm bored here. So I didn't have a diploma. And then I actually started to do some job education for, what is it called? Beautician, I think. So I did makeup, and then I even got my degree for that. But then I realized, okay, this is maybe I want to do more than this. So then I actually myself, in the end, I studied for the exams, and I took the exams with it still. So I didn't go any longer to secondary school, to high school, but I just signed up for the exams, and then I made it, but not with the highest grades. So in the end, my parents were of course super happy that I mean, it took a little detour, but in the end I made it.
Well, that was my other question, is because you said, not many people in your family, or maybe in the village you're from, that went on to do university. What does your family think now of what it is that you're doing?
Of course, they are very, very proud. They don't really understand everything about being a scientist and what that means, and that you need to travel and go to conferences. And so at some point my mom actually asked me, can you please let me know every time you go somewhere, because sometimes I'm worried and I don't know where you are. But I mean, you travel a lot, so every time to text her, okay, this time I'm going to this conference, it's also a bit too much. But I mean, of course they follow everything, and they are really proud of what I'm doing. It's also new to them.
I think people are always surprised at how much traveling scientists actually get to do, which is can be a bonus, but can also be maybe a bit tiring at times. It's very exciting actually to go to places, to meet people. Also now when I'm a group leader, I think it's very important to spread the word that I'm out, that I'm there, that I'm the type of science that we do. Because when you're still a junior group leader, it's of course no one knows who you are, and no one knows the science, etc. So that's why it's super important to do it. And I'm happy I got invites to go to places, but at the same time it takes a lot of time, and also time that I'm not in the lab. So I'm not spending the time with my PhD students, postdocs, and that's sometimes it's a pity, because I also like to be there for them. As I mentioned before, we share an interest in the sort of off-the-grid backpacking, hiking trips. What got you started in this? Was it again just sort of growing up in a sort of more rural environment?
Actually, it happened during my PhD time. Together with a friend, we discovered together that this was really what we love to do. So the first trip was with this friend to Portugal, where we did a 400k hike, and we never did it before. We just said, okay, let's take the
That's
backpack.
a big one to start with.
And let's just go. And we loved it. We really loved it, both of us. So then during my PhD time, every year we went on a trip, a couple of weeks, usually far away off the grid indeed, and just with a tent. And then the only thing you need to do is walk from A to B, and the next day again. And I think for me it's the perfect way to relax, to clear my mind. You really don't, then I really don't think about work, and I think it's important to disconnect sometimes. So for me it's perfect this way.
Mm-hmm, yeah. people here, walking with a backpack and a tent and stuff for 400 kilometers, and maybe they don't think relaxing, but but I
well,
agree.
it's maybe not relaxing for the body, but it is relaxing for the mind, and I think that's also very important. So for me, this is why I love it, and of course, being in nature, seeing beautiful places, and of course, that's also important.
Well, if you ever make it to Canada and need some recommendations for trips, I can definitely recommend some. So I'm interested then in your switch to, or your pursuit of cancer biology, cancer research. When did you realize that was something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, so I started with more stem cell research, actually. So during my PhD, the start was really studying the stem cells in the breast during development. But of course, when you talk about stem cells, then the next question is, okay, what happens if something goes wrong with this development of the breast, or when these stem cells go out of hand? So the connection with cancer was immediately there. And it was a very logical follow-up. So then I slowly moved into tumor formation in the breast and how stem cells could be involved in that. And now actually the lab really works around that question most of the time. So I think it was just a natural follow-up project after my first PhD project.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is something that I kind of wrote down on my notes here. Because cancer is this condition where it's healthy cells sort of gone rogue, gone wild, you mentioned that you started by studying the healthy stem cells and then ended up in cancer. Is there something about studying cancer, researching cancer, that really informs us about the healthy side of it? I think of aging. People often connect aging research and cancer. So what does your research in cancer, or your perspective on researching cancer, teach us about the healthy functioning of cells?
I think it's always super important to actually look at the healthy processes first, because if you don't understand what is normal, you actually will not understand what goes wrong when cancer develops. And it's really at this interface where we try to also work. So we have a lot of projects where we try to understand how does the normal tissue respond to, for example, hormones in the female breast. This is super important. The hormones, they regulate a lot of things. So understanding first, how do normal cells or stem cells, how do normal stem cells respond to hormones? And then, okay, how do then cancer cells or cells with mutations respond differently? So it's key to have always the back and forth between the normal physiology on the one hand, and then only then we can see what goes wrong when there is cancer or mutations.
So cancer is also one of these conditions where I've heard it talked about, where if you could solve cancer or other things, maybe like neurodegenerative diseases, but that the human lifespan is actually probably much longer than we assume. So if we could just sort of fix these conditions, is that something that you've encountered and that you think about, or do you disagree with that sort of thinking?
I think it's probably it's true, but just fixing it is not how it works. And I think we still don't even understand the origins of cancer. So we don't even know yet how it originates. So if you don't know how it originates, you will also not yet be able to solve it. I think indeed the key for healthy aging will really be to prevent it. And finding ways to prevent cancer from developing. I think that's probably the way to go. So not fixing it when it's already there, but try to prevent it or delay these type of processes in the human body. That's probably what we should try to aim for. But yeah, this is not where we are now.
Right, and this kind of then leads to the next question I have, or one of the next questions I have, because your work specifically is looking at the progression of tumors. So this development of tumors from healthy tissue to a tumor and then beyond. For many people on the outside, when they hear cancer research, they just maybe think of the more medical side of chemotherapy. How do we get new drugs? How do we get new treatments? And you kind of alluded to a little bit here why it's important to look at this whole thing. But for those of us on the outside, Could you maybe explain how your approach to your research and this question will eventually, lead to the medical side, to the treatments that people might one day see?
Yeah, so if I take the example of prevention, which is still something probably in the far, far future, that we can do something about that. But so what we are trying to understand now is, how does a tumor start? From the first changes in the DNA to then the formation of a lesion, of a lesion in the tissue. And by understanding this step by step, we can probably really find now the pathways driving this. And if we could block that already at the very, very beginning, then of course you could eventually prevent cancer from forming. But we first need to understand the process, as I also said before. So these dynamics from the very beginning to the end, and understanding the underlying molecular mechanisms. So the proteins, the DNA changes, the changes in the tissue that drive it will be fundamental, of fundamental importance.
And now it's time to dig a little deeper in a segment we call Dare to Ask. So I am going to ask you some questions that people would like to ask but would never really dare to ask. And these come from the VIB community. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Who at VIB has had the biggest influence on your career, and what did they teach you?
It's probably all the PIs of our institute. So in the beginning, when I joined, I was quite junior, and I was afraid that they would probably not see me as a group leader from day one, because I just came from being a PhD student to group leader. And all of them immediately, they fully embraced me, and they made me feel like coming home, and really being one of them. And yeah, that's not really teaching something, but at the same time, it really helped me to start my group. And yeah, so they taught me not to be afraid of not being taken seriously at my age.
As someone who inspires other scientists, what advice would you give to researchers struggling to find their passion in science?
But if they struggle to find their passion, it probably means they're not passionate about science. So I think then it's important to look further and look into other fields and see where their passion actually is. Because if you're passionate about science, you will immediately know it. When you're starting your PhD, or even already in the master thesis, you will already say, okay, yes, this is what I like to do. And if that's not the case, then it's maybe better to try to find another way or another career.
I think that's a good answer, and it's, again, something that's come up in previous episodes. But yeah, this idea that once you're in science, you have to only end up as a professor or group leader or something like that. Otherwise, it's all been a waste or something like this. But there really is other options, and you should not be afraid to realize when maybe you need to make a switch or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the most important thing is that you are actually passionate and happy every day, happy that you're a scientist. And if that's not the case, then it doesn't matter, right? Then you do something else. And it's also not a waste, the time that you spent in science, because it allowed you to discover that actually this is not for you. And I don't think it's a waste of time. You always learn something.
Could you see yourself doing something else outside of science, or is this it?
Yeah, I think if it wouldn't work out in science, I would probably go more. So yeah, I didn't give that information yet. But so I'm living on a farm, and we have a lot of horses at home, and I would probably try to make a living out of that. So really, with the horses, with the farm, etc. So I would probably also be happy then. So maybe when I'm older.
Okay. If after listening to this Dare to Ask, you find yourself with a question you've never dared to ask, let us know in the comments. And who knows, maybe your question will appear in the next episode. Your work really does seem to have this big picture view of the lifespan of a tumor, and I imagine that there's a lot of then steps along the way where you can get very detailed and very niche into that. So how do you balance those two things of, trying to really drill down and focus on certain aspects while maintaining a bigger picture of the whole research program?
So it's nice that you say the word picture because we do a lot of microscopy in my team, and this is exactly the approach we take. So we look at the process using microscopy technologies where we actually have the bigger picture first. So we really see first what's going on, which cells are we looking at, what are these cells doing. And then when we see interesting behavior, for example, a cancer cell moving to another place or changing its shape, then we dive into that little detail, and then we try to understand the mechanism. So this is exactly what we try to do, starting from the bigger picture, and it's literally a picture, to then go to the molecular details. So our hypothesis during our research that we make, they are really usually based on an observation, something we've seen through the microscope.
Right. So it feels like you have to be sort of flexible to be able to react to what you're seeing and then follow that clue, which I think, again, maybe for people outside of research, and even for me when I was doing research in grad school, kind of feels counterintuitive because, you're doing your PhD, you really focus on one, sort of niche thing, but here you are sort of trying to take a broader view, but then also be ready to react, which feels like maybe a bit of a different process for most scientists.
Yeah, and I noticed that with the PhD students in the team, when they start, they sometimes are a bit confused. But then, once they have their observation and they have their cool observation that they want to study, then it's very clear, okay, this is what I'm going to study, and now here I'm going to try to find the mechanism to probably block it or prevent this from happening. But indeed, before that first observation is there, it can sometimes be a bit difficult.
When people are researching diseases like cancer that touch so many people, and everyone sort of has a story or knows somebody with cancer, so there's obviously this emotional side to it. Do you find that it's difficult to keep that in mind while doing your work? Can it be a distraction or can it be a motivator, I guess is what I'm saying?
It's more a motivator because you know why you're doing it. Of course, there are many very sad stories, but it also shows us that a lot of research is still needed, and that's a motivator for me to really understand the mechanisms and hopefully, finally, in the end, be able to help some of these people. Yeah.
So maybe in a similar vein, we kind of talked about the things that you can learn, positive things you can learn from studying a disease. Is there ever a conflict in your mind of I'm getting so excited about cancer cells or cancer, this nefarious sort of thing, but it's your life's work. It causes you great excitement. Is there ever a conflict there in your mind?
It sometimes feels indeed a bit weird when you're excited about a finding, but at the same time, this means actually a lot of people get sick because of this. And this sometimes happens also during a lab meeting in my team, that we get very excited about a cancer cell metastasizing, going to a different place. And then at the same time, that this is what people die of, So there is always this it has two sides. So on the one hand, you're excited to find something, to see some interesting behavior of cancer cells. At the same time, that this causes a lot of deaths, actually.
So some of your colleagues at VIB would describe you as driven. Do you see yourself as driven? Is that a word you would use to describe yourself?
Yeah, I think driven, but also curious and really excited about research. That's who I am. That's me.
So then what is it that drives you exactly?
I think it's mostly curiosity that drives me. So I really would like to understand things, so how things work. That is really what wakes me up every day. So it's not so much towards a goal, I would say. It's more just understanding. I'm very interested in science and the questions that we try to address.
As I mentioned, you went right from a PhD into a group leader position. And again, it's an astounding achievement. Not many people make that leap that quickly. Do you ever regret maybe not exploring another opportunity or taking some time to explore a different field, maybe even.
Yeah, that's of course indeed the downside of what, the choice that I made to immediately go into the group leader position. But no, I don't regret it because it gave a lot of opportunities and a lot of possibilities that otherwise would not have been possible, or at least not in the time frame that it was possible now. But it meant that I stayed in the same field, same type of research, same technologies. But of course, in the meantime, we pushed the field forward. So there are now many new questions and different ones from when I started. So I think there's enough to do still in the field to not get bored.
And with your position at VIB, are you able to sort of maybe expand the question that you're looking at and the research you have, so you maybe still have some of those opportunities left to explore?
Yes. Yeah, so as a PhD student, of course, you have to limit yourself. You can only do so much by yourself. And in the beginning, when you start a group, it's still small and you have to limit yourself again to really focus on things. But now when the group has grown and there's multiple people working in my lab now, it's really nice because you can go in different directions. And so in addition to we always focused a lot on the origin of cancer, so really the first steps. But now, because I could expand the group, we now also do a lot of research into metastasis, trying to see how and find ways how we can, for example, prevent metastasis. So in that way, we already expanded a little bit and can now explore different fields and different questions.
Do you ever miss not being the boss?
I like to be the boss.
Well, I'm glad that you admit that. I mean, some people might view that as a negative thing to say, but I think it's really good. I think it makes you have a clear vision, I'd say, of what you would like. Yeah,
I think I'm not afraid to take decisions, to make decisions. Of course, I always try to discuss with people, but in the end, I like it that it's me making the decisions, and that it's mostly me being in charge of where we are going, what projects we are doing, and of course it's together with my team. But I'm in the end the person who will make the final call, and I think that's I like that. Yeah.
Do you feel a pressure that comes with that, especially for example, deciding on research projects with PhD students that maybe are risky, maybe they don't work out the way that you're hoping? Is there a pressure that comes with that?
Yes, definitely. So, of course, you want every PhD student to be successful, but sometimes you also need to take risks to really push the boundaries and make discoveries. You have to take some risk. So what I try to do usually is give PhD students a really high-risk, high-gain project, and at the same time also have a safe option. So in case the risky part doesn't work out, that they are not, after a couple of years, that they are not there with empty hands, and that they at least have data to build on and to build their own story, because they need to build towards a publication in the end, at the end of their PhD. So I like to take the risks, and at the same time, I try to also always have the safe option next to it.
That feels, again, talking about balance, that it might be kind of a hard thing to balance, but I'm curious about how you view risk then in science. It seems like it would be an important thing to be comfortable with, as you say, if you want to push the boundaries.
I would say every project is risky, because science is about learning new things and discovering new mechanisms, new biology that was not known yet before. And because you don't know what you're going to discover, it's always risky. So you make a hypothesis, but most of the time your hypothesis is not true. And then you have to start over again, go to the drawing board and think differently. But that's exactly what I like about science. So a bit of uncertainty that's what I like and enjoy.
So then how do you deal then when the risk doesn't pan out, when there isn't the reward? How do you mentally, or in your research in your lab, how do you refocus? How do you reset? But
you always learn something. So even if everything fails, you will always learn. I mean, at the least you learn how it doesn't work, how it's not working. So I think you always learn something, and you can always again build on that. You always have new knowledge, even though it turns out you were wrong. It's still new knowledge, and there's always ways on building on that, and then changing your focus, and then go into another direction.
You're familiar with the term imposter syndrome?
I know what it means.
Yeah, you're familiar with the term. I would think that given, you've accomplished a lot, you seem to be really focused, really driven, you say that you don't necessarily feel that. Is that true?
Yeah, usually, yeah.
Okay. Is that something that's just naturally to you? You've not felt that sort of uncomfortableness? It's just with your focus?
Yeah, I think I really like what I'm doing, and maybe I'm also not thinking so often about things that could go wrong, or also about maybe that others would be better at something, or that I'm not good enough. I just focus on the things I like, and by doing that, I mean, that makes me happy, so then I do that.
Great. So, looking ahead, you have a long career in front of you. What are you most excited about, or are there any goals that you would like to achieve that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I really hope that in my career I can find ways to prevent cancer from growing or happening at all. Our focus is breast, so preventing breast cancer would be really my long-term goal. Because then you can prevent all the treatments, and women will just age more healthy, and that would be my goal.
Well, you've set not an easy goal, I imagine, but a very noble one. So before we finish the podcast, we like to ask all the guests one final question, and it's the same question. It is, if you were to encounter an omniscient being and could ask one question, what would that question be?
And what is I need to get more information. So, what would this being look like?
Ooh, what would it look like? Ooh, now I get to be creative. Just a glowing orb with a voice.
Okay. So you could talk to that.
You could talk to
it.
Yeah, to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and it's okay. So probably then I would ask, what do you think about us human beings?
That's a great answer. Not the way I would have approached it, but I'm really fascinated by that answer. It's your curiosity. You're curious to know what they want to know.
Yeah, I would be wondering what they think of us and the human beings and what we are doing here, and just their opinion about us.
Wow, you might be the only human that would ask that. I think every other human would want to know something. That's great. Thank you for that answer. Colinda, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
If you want to hear more inspiring stories from our VIB scientists, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. And if you liked the last episode, leave us a like or positive review. It really helps. Thanks for listening to Called to Science.